Hey guys, I saw a thread about button height on Mouse Review, and I wanted to give some thoughts about that because I thought it was an interesting topic. Um, I'm not somebody who historically is super picky about button height, but I have some kind of basic reasons why I think that's the case, and a hypothesis about why other people might be more particular about it. To start with, my basic idea is that I think any button height is fine as long as it falls within the very kind of natural and easy range of motion that your fingers have. So if you look at like the angle that your fingers are bent at the first knuckle here, if you straighten your hand out completely like this, you have to apply some muscular force to hold this shape. If I relax my hand, then my fingers end up about here. And I think this is probably the hand shape that would result in the tallest functional button height. So if I just slap that on the outset, you can see actually I am getting really good solid palm contact right now, and my index and middle fingers are pretty much right on the buttons. Um, so to me, this mouse works. It's at the very kind of upper limit of how tall the buttons can be and still be comfortable. I wouldn't want them to be up here, right? That would start to get annoying because I'd be constantly having to put some stress into my muscles in order to keep my fingers lifted off the switches. Because if I say artificially increase this angle and I don't hold my fingers up like this, what you'll see is that resting like this, they're fine. But if I even lift my wrist up this much, just the force of my fingers trying to relax themselves is enough to actuate the switches. I'm not flexing my fingers at all. I'm just lifting my wrist. So if you want to game with a mouse that forces your wrist to sit at this kind of an angle, your fingers to be flexed, your knuckles, sorry, to sit at this kind of an angle, for your fingers to be flexed further back than is natural, you have to hold them up. And that's going to get really fatiguing, and it's also going to affect how good of a job you can do at picking your fingers up after clicking. That type of fatigue will also affect your ability to do things like use your fingers to steer the front of the mouse by applying side to side pressure, because the more muscular fatigue you have, the harder it's going to be to maintain that balance of pushing on the switches enough to get friction but not click on them. The reason I swapped over to the 703 to demonstrate this is it has these nice curves here that promote using your fingers to help steer the front of the mouse. Um, so what I'm trying to say is that if I go from that highest allowable button height that's comfortable, about like this, I think my fingers can probably droop down to about here comfortably, which is a lot lower button height than any mouse can possibly manage. So I think generally speaking, lower button height is fine. You're never going to have a mouse with buttons that are too low. The only downside to lower button heights is it takes away real estate on the front right of the mouse for ring fingers to position, because I'm one of those people who push their fingers towards the front of the mouse, and if the buttons are too low up here, it starts to grind or drag on the side of my ring finger, and it's not very comfortable, and I also don't feel like I have enough space to grip. But mouse designs like the 703, where it has this vertical wall that's split from the button, you could lower this button height significantly. And as long as you left this here to give me enough space for my ring finger, I wouldn't care. That would be fine, right? But people don't do that because you'd have this big exposed um, kind of wall that everything else sits inside of, and it would probably look a bit funny. So I don't know. Anyway, it would be an interesting idea for a mouse company to try if they want to retain this type of a vertical element on the side, but then very low button height in between them. All that being said, my theory about why, say, like RJN in particular is kind of famous for being particular about button height, I think has to do with his grip. Because if I understand correctly, he uses what I have historically referred to as an extended fingertip grip, or what some people are now calling relaxed fingertip grip, which basically means you don't have any palm contact whatsoever, but your fingers are relatively straight on the mouse. And if I'm gripping like this and trying to game, because I'm not getting palm contact and I can't use the back of my hand to help steer the mouse, I would probably want less drag on the pad. So I would imagine that I would want, with this type of a grip, to have my wrist lifted up more so that it's not dragging. And by lifting his wrist, what you get is more bent backwards knuckles. So if you're playing like this, I feel like the outset is too tall at the buttons and I want lower buttons. I also want this point on the mouse, the highest point, to be lower too. So anyway, if that holds up, if my understanding of his grip is accurate, it makes sense that he feels lower buttons are desirable, not from a standpoint of whatever he says about it's like holding a pencil, but just that he's not having to actively curl his fingers backwards just to avoid accidentally clicking the switches, right? Um, so that's my thinking about it. Anyway, is that realistically at the end of the day it's a question of the angle that your first knuckle is making with your palm, and as long as you can grip your mouse with your fingers relaxed and not feel like you have to hold them up off the mouse to avoid accidentally clicking, right, then you're fine.